The Montana snow fell like shards of glass, silent, endless. On a forgotten back road, a lone truck engine echoed through the night. Behind the wheel, Michael Grayson, a war veteran with eyes that had seen too much, was searching for peace, and found something else. There, beside a rusted truck, a German shepherd was chained, bleeding, trembling, fighting the cold with the last spark of life. When their eyes met, soldier to soldier, Michael felt it. This was no stray. He cut the chain, the dog collapsed into his arms, and in that fragile silence, headlights flickered through the trees. Someone was watching, and what began as a rescue would soon uncover a secret dark enough to shake an entire town. Rivermount, Montana, was a town built on silence. In winter, the world there seemed to forget the idea of warmth. The wind rolled down from the Rockies like something alive, a restless ghost that scraped along rooftops and whispered through pine needles. At night, the sky hung low and gray, and the cold had a way of getting under the skin, into the bones, into thought itself. On nights like this, few dared to drive past the last gas station on Main Street. The road turned narrow and mean, twisting between snowdrifts that swallowed fence posts and erased the shoulders. But Michael Grayson didn't mind. Solitude had become the one thing that made sense to him. He drove an old navy blue Ford pickup, its heater coughing tired warmth and the dashboard rattling like an aging heartbeat. Michael was 39, built solid from years of labor and war, his body still carrying the discipline of a Marine, even though the uniform had long been packed away. He had close-cropped brown hair with streaks of early gray and a few days' stubble tracing the sharp lines of his jaw. A thin scar ran from his cheekbone to the corner of his mouth. A small souvenir from the desert, where explosions wrote memories you never asked for. He didn't talk much in town. The few locals who recognized him from the hardware store said he was polite but distant, a man who tipped his cap, thanked the clerk, and left before the conversation could grow roots. What they didn't know was that Michael carried the weight of someone who had buried more than friends overseas. His older brother, Daniel, had served with him. Daniel hadn't come home. That kind of loss doesn't leave. It just changes its shape. Tonight the snow came down heavy, glittering under his headlights. The wipers carved steady arcs through the white, and the radio hummed low static. Michael's gloved hands rested loose on the wheel, guiding rather than steering, the way you do when you've driven 1,000 lonely miles through nights just like this. He didn't expect to see anything alive. So when the glint appeared on the roadside, a flash of reflected light that shouldn't have been there, he instinctively eased off the gas. The truck slowed, tires crunching over packed snow. A second flash, lower this time, pulsed between the trees. Michael frowned. What the hell? He pulled over, shifted into park, and let the engine idle a moment before killing it. The silence that followed was thick, the kind that pressed against the eardrums. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove box, zipped his jacket to the chin, and stepped out. The air slapped him cold. His boots sank an inch into the crusted snow as he walked toward the dark outline up ahead. The beam of his flashlight swept across broken tree limbs and the skeletal frame of an abandoned pickup, its metal eaten with rust, one tire missing, the windshield collapsed inward like a rib cage. At first, he thought the flash had been the chrome, bumper catching his lights. Then came the sound. A whimper, faint, raw, and unmistakably alive. Michael froze, listening. Another whimper answered, weaker this time. He moved closer, careful with his steps. The beam found movement inside the shell of the old truck. For a heartbeat, it looked like a shadow shifting against the metal. Then it lifted its head. It was a German shepherd, large but gaunt, ribs carved deep under the fur. The animal was chained to the frame, the heavy links cutting into its neck. Its paws were bloodied from clawing at the frozen ground. Ice clung to its whiskers and to the matted tufts of fur around its chest. Michael's breath left him in a cloud. "Oh, Jesus!" He crouched beside the open cab. The dog's ears twitched, its eyes locking on him, not pleading but defiant, as if daring him to come closer. Those eyes were deep amber, intelligent and wild, the kind of eyes that had once known command and trust, and had both broken. Michael spoke softly, his voice barely above the wind. "Easy there, buddy. I'm not here to hurt you." The dog's lips curled weakly over its teeth, a dry growl rumbling in its chest. The sound wasn't threat. It was memory, instinct running on empty. Michael kept talking, his tone steady, slow, the same way he used to calm frightened civilians during patrols in foreign towns. He studied the chain. Whoever had done this hadn't meant for the dog to live. The collar was a strip of torn leather, reinforced with twisted wire. Each tremor from the dog's shaking body made the wire bite deeper into flesh. Michael reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folding knife, the same one he'd carried through 2 tours of duty. He flipped it open with a metallic click. The sound made the dog flinch. "Hang in there," he murmured. "We'll get this off." The chain was frozen stiff, orange with rust. He braced the knife against one of the thinner links and started sawing. The cold bit through his gloves, numbing his fingers. But he kept working. With every drag of the blade, the dog's breathing quickened, a trembling rhythm in the dark. Finally, the metal cracked with a soft, decisive snap. The shepherd stumbled forward, legs folding beneath him. Michael caught the body before it hit the snow. The weight shocked him. Too light for a dog that size, bones sharp under his hands. He could feel the rapid flutter of its heartbeat against his chest. "Easy, easy," he said again, his breath visible in short bursts. The dog trembled but didn't resist. Its head rested against his shoulder, the rough fur damp from melted snow. Up close, Michael saw how age and hardship had worn it down. Maybe 5 years old, maybe 6, the prime of a working dog's life. Somewhere in that battered frame still lived discipline, loyalty, and a stubborn refusal to die. He unwrapped his scarf and slid it carefully between the collar and the raw skin, creating a barrier from the wire. The dog winced once, then went still, accepting the help like a soldier taking orders. "Yeah," Michael whispered. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" The shepherd lifted its gaze again, meeting his eyes. For a second, neither moved. Then, as if something unspoken passed between them, the tension eased. Michael didn't know why the word came to him, or why it felt right when it did. "Shadow," he said quietly. "That's your name now." The dog's ears flicked at the sound, a faint recognition stirring in its tired body. Michael smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. He stood, holding the animal against his chest, boots crunching toward the truck. Snowflakes drifted through the beam of his headlights like falling ash. He opened the passenger door and laid the dog gently on the seat, tucking the scarf around its neck for warmth. As he circled around to the driver's side, he paused. Something made him look back toward the trees. Between the dark trunks, a light blinked once, sharp, deliberate, and far too low to be a star. Headlights. Someone out there had seen him. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the light vanished. Michael's stomach tightened. Instinct hummed through him, the old combat sense that whispered when something unseen was close. He scanned the tree line again, every nerve awake, but the forest held its breath. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and glanced at the dog. Shadow's eyes were half closed, chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Exhaustion had won, but life still burned beneath it. "Don't worry, pal," Michael murmured, his voice steady but low. "You're safe now." Outside, the snow thickened, blurring the world into white silence. Michael put the truck into gear and eased forward, headlights cutting a narrow path through the storm. As Rivermount's distant lights began to glimmer beyond the ridge, he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was only the beginning. That the dog beside him carried not just scars, but a secret that someone, somewhere, would do anything to keep buried. And as the road curved into darkness, the faintest glow appeared again in his rearview mirror. A pair of headlights, far back, matching his speed. The snow hadn't stopped when Michael pulled into town. It hung thick in the air like ash from a quiet fire, blanketing the small main street of Rivermount in a silence that felt almost sacred. Street lamps burned through the haze, their halos soft and yellow, and the few cars parked along the curb were half buried beneath the storm's steady patience. It was well past midnight, and every shopfront was dark except for one. A squat brick building at the far end of Main Street with a wooden sign that read, "Myers Veterinary Clinic." Michael parked in the narrow lot, engine idling. In the passenger seat, the German Shepherd slept fitfully, legs twitching in dreams, breath shallow and uneven. The scarf around its neck was soaked, darkened with dried blood near the collarbone. Michael hesitated before waking it, his fingers resting gently against its shoulder. "Hang in there, Shadow," he murmured. "We're almost there." He stepped out into the storm, boots sinking in snow, and rounded the truck. The door hinges creaked in protest as he lifted the dog into his arms. Shadow stirred, whimpering softly, but didn't resist. The animal's weight pressed close against him, and the warmth of its body cut through the cold in a way that startled him. For the first time in years, he wasn't just carrying a burden. He was carrying something that trusted him. The clinic door jingled as he entered. Inside, the air was sharp with antiseptic and cedar shavings. The lights were dim except for one lamp at the reception counter, where a man stood bent over paperwork. He looked up when he heard the bell, his brow furrowing beneath a sweep of graying hair. "Lord Almighty," the man said, stepping out from behind the desk. "What happened to that poor thing?" "Found him chained to a wreck out by the ridge," Michael replied. "Didn't look like he was meant to make it through the night." Dr. Henry Myers was in his early 50s, a stocky man with broad shoulders and hands built for steadiness. His face carried the weathered lines of someone who'd spent as much time outdoors as in, and behind the smudges on his glasses sat eyes that had seen their share of suffering, in animals and people alike. A small scar cut across his chin, the result of a horse kick years back, though he joked it had improved his jawline. He had once dreamed of running a big city practice but stayed in Rivermount after his father passed, taking over the clinic out of duty and love for the town that had raised him. He motioned toward the exam room. "Bring him in. We'll see what we can do." Michael followed, laying the dog gently on a metal table. The shepherd's breathing quickened under the bright light. Myers moved with practiced efficiency, checking pulse, lifting each paw, inspecting the wounds. "He's dehydrated, lost some blood but not enough to be fatal. Paw pads are split, ribs bruised." He ran his fingers through the matted fur at the dog's neck and frowned. "Damn! Someone wrapped wire through the collar. Cruel bastards." Michael's jaw tightened. "Can you get it off?" "Already on it." Myers picked up a pair of cutters and snipped through the wire, peeling the layers back carefully until the dog's skin was free. He dabbed disinfectant over the raw line, the smell sharp and clean. "He's tough. Most dogs wouldn't have lasted this long." Shadow twitched at the touch, but didn't growl. His eyes tracked the doctor, alert despite exhaustion. Myers noticed and paused. "You've still got some fight, don't you, boy?" Michael nodded. "He's earned the name. Shadow." The doctor smiled faintly. "Good name. Fits him." For several minutes, the only sound was the clink of instruments and the low hum of the overhead light. When Myers parted the fur again to check for deeper bruising, he froze. His hand hovered mid-air. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. Michael leaned closer. "What is it?" "Look here," the doctor said, using the edge of a cloth to wipe away grime. Beneath the dirt, etched faintly into the skin near the dog's collarbone, was a small tattoo, a sequence of letters and numbers. The ink had faded, but the outline was clear. "That's not just any marking. That's an identification code. Military issue." Michael blinked. "You're saying he's K9? "Looks that way," Myers said, adjusting his glasses. "I've seen a few like it. Dogs used in army or police units get tagged like this. Each code ties to a handler, a unit, a program. But this one?" He squinted. "SRU 107. That prefix. I haven't seen it before." Before Michael could ask, the clinic door jingled behind them. A gust of cold air followed, along with the sound of quick footsteps. "Doc?" a young female voice called. "Your truck's lights are still—" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw the scene. Standing in the doorway was Grace Collins, a deputy with the Rivermount Police Department. She was 26, tall and lean, her frame built more from morning jogs than gym weights. A few loose strands of auburn hair escaped the messy bun at the nape of her neck, and her cheeks were still pink from the cold. Her uniform jacket was unzipped over a gray turtleneck, and she had the kind of energy that filled a room without trying. "Grace," Myers said, relieved. "Perfect timing. We might need your help." She stepped closer, eyes widening as she saw the dog on the table. "Oh my God, what happened to him?" "Found him out by the ridge," Michael said. "Tied to a wreck. Almost froze to death." Grace's expression softened, the professional mask slipping for a moment. "Who would do something like that?" "That's what I'd like to know," Michael replied. Myers pointed at the marking. "Grace, you've got access to some of the department databases, right? I think this dog was part of a K9 unit." Her eyes lit with curiosity. "Seriously? Let me take a look." She leaned in, brushing her hair aside, and peered at the faint tattoo. "SRU 107, she read aloud. "That's definitely a military or federal tag. I can check the archives at the station tomorrow. Might take some digging. Our systems are half fossilized." Myers chuckled. "So's our sheriff." Grace smirked, then turned back to Michael. "You did the right thing bringing him in. Most people would have driven by. You a vet?" "Marine Corps," Michael answered simply. Her gaze softened with understanding. "Thought so. You've got that look." "What look's that?" "The one people get when they've seen too much and still keep going." Michael didn't reply, but his lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Grace straightened, pulling her gloves back on. "I'll start digging in the morning. Something about this doesn't sit right." Myers finished wrapping the bandages around Shadow's paw. "He's stable for now. Needs rest, fluids, and some food. I'll keep him here overnight." "I'll come by first thing," Michael said. The doctor nodded. "You got a good heart, Grayson. Not many stop for strays these days." Michael met his eyes. "He's not a stray." Outside, the wind pressed against the clinic windows, snow swirling in ghostly patterns under the parking lights. Grace glanced toward the door, then back at Michael. "If he really was part of some unit, whoever left him out there didn't want him found. You might have stepped into something bigger than you think." "I've been in worse," Michael said quietly. Grace gave him a look that was half respect, half warning. "Yeah," she said softly, "but not here in Rivermount." Myers dimmed the overhead light, leaving the room washed in a gentle amber glow. Shadow shifted slightly on the table, his breathing calmer now. When Michael reached out to rest his hand near the dog's shoulder, the animal pressed his nose weakly against his palm, a quiet gesture, wordless but full of meaning. Grace noticed, her expression softening again. "Looks like he's already picked his person." Michael glanced down at the shepherd, whose eyes had closed but whose tail thumped faintly against the table. "Guess so," he said. He stood, stretching his back, and headed for the door. Grace followed him out, pausing under the awning. The snow had slowed to a fine dust, glittering under the streetlights. "Be careful driving home," she said. "This storm's got a mean streak." Michael gave a brief nod. "I've seen meaner." She smiled. "I'll let you know what I find tomorrow." When he turned toward his truck, Shadow lifted his head weakly from inside the clinic, watching him go. The eyes that had once been hard with fear now carried something softer. Trust, maybe even recognition. Michael paused at the door, met that gaze, and for a moment it felt as though the frozen world around them had eased its grip. "Rest easy, Shadow," he murmured. "You're safe tonight." As he stepped into the cold and the door swung shut behind him, the last thing he saw was the shepherd settling back under the blanket, the soft rise and fall of breath against the quiet hum of the clinic's heater. Outside, Rivermount slept beneath its heavy quilt of snow, unaware that beneath one small roof, a scarred man and a broken dog had just reopened a secret buried years ago. The storm had passed, leaving Rivermount under a sheet of white silence. The kind of silence that hums in your ears until you start to imagine it breathing. Michael Grayson woke to that silence just before dawn, the wood stove in the corner of his cabin sputtering its last ember. He pulled a blanket tighter over his shoulders and listened. For a moment, there was only the soft creak of the roof under the weight of snow. Then, a bark, short, sharp, desperate. He threw the blanket aside and crossed to the window. Outside, the landscape glowed faintly blue under the moon's retreat. The pine trees stood buried to their branches, and frost clung to the fence posts like ghostly lace. Down by the front gate, Shadow was a dark blur against the snow, his breath visible in quick, heavy bursts. The dog barked again, 3 times, each one sharper than the last. Michael slipped on his jacket and boots, snatched his rifle from the wall, old habit, not fear, and stepped out into the pre-dawn cold. The air was brittle, sharp enough to sting his lungs. "Easy, boy," he called softly. "What is it?" Shadow's ears pinned forward, eyes locked on the tree line beyond the fence. His body was tense but not panicked, the stance of a trained canine sensing something wrong but waiting for command. Michael followed the line of the dog's gaze. There, just past the edge of the clearing, he caught it, a flash of movement, dark against darker. Then came the faint crunch of tires on snow. A black pickup truck rolled slowly down the back road that curved near his property. Its headlights were off, the silhouette just visible in the dim light. Michael watched as it paused for a heartbeat, engine purring low, then turned and disappeared into the woods. He stayed there until the sound faded completely, his breath forming clouds that drifted up into the still morning air. The last time he'd seen a truck that shape had been 2 nights ago, flickering headlights in the trees when he'd found Shadow. "Someone's looking for you," he murmured to the dog. Shadow stood close, pressing lightly against his leg, eyes still on the forest. Michael rested a gloved hand on his head. "Not tonight. They won't find you tonight." He led the dog back inside, bolting the door and throwing another log into the stove. The rest of the night passed without another sound, but neither man nor dog truly slept. By morning, Rivermount looked reborn. The snow on the roofs shone bright under a weak sun, and the pines dripped with melting frost. Michael's cabin sat at the edge of the valley, a small timber house that had once belonged to his father, a man of few words and even fewer friends. The porch leaned slightly to one side, the railing worn smooth by years of wind, but to Michael, it was home enough. After a quick breakfast, he checked on Shadow. The dog was already at the door, tail twitching, nose lifted to the air. He seemed stronger today. His coat, brushed clean, his eyes clear. Whatever nightmare had been carved into him by chains was being replaced by something steadier. Purpose. "All right," Michael said, pulling on his gloves. "Let's get you some air." They walked along the property line, Shadow trotting ahead but never out of sight. The snow was deep enough to swallow the tops of Michael's boots, and the cold bit at his cheeks. He felt it more than he used to. Combat might harden a man's nerves, but it didn't make him immune to weather. Halfway around the yard, a faint voice carried over the wind, a boy's voice calling out. Michael stopped. Shadow's ears perked instantly. "Hello?" Michael called back. No answer, just the rustle of branches and the faint whimper of something small. Then, through the gaps in the fence, a figure appeared. A boy bundled in a heavy red coat, snow clinging to his hat and scarf. He couldn't have been more than 12. "Hey there," Michael said, lowering his voice to keep it calm. "You lost?" The boy startled, eyes wide. I was trying to get home. I took the shortcut through the back road, but I think I turned the wrong way." Michael stepped closer, seeing him clearly now. The boy had pale skin, the kind that freckled easily, and a mop of brown hair peeking from under his wool hat. His nose was red from the cold, and his gloved hands clutched a small backpack. "What's your name?" Michael asked. "Tommy Reynolds, sir. I live past the ridge, near the sawmill." Michael nodded. "That's a long way to wander in this weather, Tommy. You must have been walking for hours." The boy shrugged sheepishly. "Mom says I got no sense of direction. Guess she's right." Before Michael could answer, Shadow trotted forward, tail raised but cautious. The boy stiffened as the big shepherd approached, unsure whether to back away or reach out. "It's all right," Michael said. "He won't hurt you." Shadow stopped a few feet from the boy, sniffing the air. His ears flicked once, twice, and then, slowly, he took another step forward. Tommy extended a hand, palm open. The dog sniffed it, then pressed his muzzle gently into the boy's glove and licked his fingers. Tommy laughed in relief. "He's friendly." Michael watched, quietly surprised. Since the rescue, Shadow had been wary of everyone except him. Even at the clinic, he'd growled softly when the vet came too close. But now the dog leaned into the boy's touch, tail sweeping once across the snow. "Guess he likes you," Michael said. Tommy smiled, rubbing behind the shepherd's ears. "We used to have one, before Dad got transferred. Her name was Bella. She looked kinda like him. Same eyes." Shadow let out a low, pleased rumble, sitting back in the snow beside the boy. For a strange moment, the two seemed to recognize something in each other. Loss, maybe, or just kindness. Michael knelt to check the boy's boots. "You've been out. Long enough your toes'll freeze. Come on, let's get you warmed up. I'll drive you home." Inside the cabin, Tommy stood near the stove, his coat steaming. Michael poured him a cup of hot cocoa, the instant kind, powdered and sweet, the only thing he ever kept around besides coffee. Tommy cupped it in both hands. "Thank you, sir." "Michael's fine," he said. "Your mom must be worried sick." She will be when she finds out, the boy said, grinning. She thinks I was at my friend's house. Michael chuckled. That trick never changes. Shadow lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, eyes following the boy like a quiet guardian. Tommy looked around the cabin, the worn furniture, the faded photographs on the mantel. You live here alone? Yeah, Michael said simply. You were in the Army? Marine Corps. My dad was too, Tommy said. He says soldiers don't get scared of storms. Michael smiled faintly. Your dad's half right. We just get used to pretending. The boy thought about that, then nodded solemnly. I guess that's what brave means. For the first time since he'd returned to Rivermount, Michael felt something inside him loosen, a quiet, human warmth that wasn't from the fire. The sound of snow sliding off the roof punctuated the moment, soft and final. When Tommy finished his drink, Michael helped him into the truck. Shadow jumped into the back seat without command. As they drove toward town, the world looked clean again, reborn under morning sun. They stopped at a small yellow house with smoke curling from the chimney. A woman in a blue coat burst out the front door before Michael even cut the engine. Tommy! She cried, racing toward them. Mom! The boy shouted, tumbling into her arms. Michael stepped out, nodding politely. She was in her 30s, with dark hair pulled into a braid and the weary grace of someone who worked too hard, but loved harder. I can't thank you enough, she said, voice trembling. He never listens, goes exploring every chance he gets. Michael smiled. Just glad I was home. He's a good kid. She looked at the dog in the truck bed. And that's a good dog. Yeah, Michael said softly, glancing back at Shadow. He really is. When he finally turned the truck back toward his cabin, the sky had begun to gray again. Shadow sat alert in the passenger seat, ears pricked, eyes on the road ahead. Michael reached over, resting a hand briefly on the dog's neck. You've got a good heart, Shadow. Maybe that's what scares them. As they climbed the last hill, a cold wind swept across the ridge, carrying with it the faint echo of an engine far off in the woods, low, deliberate, and fading fast. The next morning dawned clear but brutally cold. The kind of cold that didn't just sting, it settled into your bones and made every breath a test of will. Frost glazed the windows of Michael Grayson's cabin, the air inside thin and brittle. He stood by the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee, watching Shadow by the door. The dog was restless, pacing, nose twitching as if the wind itself carried a message only he could read. It had been 2 days since the night Michael found the black pickup creeping through the trees, and the feeling of being watched hadn't left him since. He'd checked the property twice, followed tracks through the drifts until they vanished into the woods, but found nothing. Whoever had been there knew how to move unseen. Michael glanced down at the dog. You smell something? Shadow looked up, amber eyes sharp, tail stiff. He gave a low whine, pacing toward the back window. Michael followed his gaze. Out beyond the line of pines, the world looked quiet. Too quiet. He had a rule from his Marine days. When the world goes silent, it's either peace or trouble, and peace never lasts. He grabbed his coat from the hook and slung the rifle over his shoulder. All right, partner, he said. Let's see what's got you spooked. The path to the ridge was half buried under snow, the drifts waist-high in some spots. Each step crunched loud enough to make him flinch, as if sound itself might give them away. Shadow moved ahead, nose low, tail swishing like a metronome. They passed the old pine grove and the frozen creek before reaching the clearing where Michael had first found him chained to the wrecked truck. The vehicle was still there, half swallowed by snow. Its metal frame glinted dull orange in the morning light. Michael circled it slowly, eyes scanning the ground. "You sure about this place?" he murmured. Shadow barked once, short and sharp. Then he began to dig. His front paws sent bursts of powder flying. The snow here was packed unusually tight, as if someone had come back and flattened it. Michael knelt, helping scrape away the top layer. After several minutes, Shadow's claws hit something that wasn't earth. Metal. Michael brushed away more snow until the edge of a circular steel hatch appeared, its surface rusted and rough. A hinge sat buried in ice, and a heavy latch sealed it shut. It didn't look like any part of the truck. It looked like it had been here long before. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. He cleared the latch with his knife and tugged. The metal groaned but didn't move. He set the rifle aside, wedged the knife under the edge, and pried harder. With a brittle pop, the ice gave way, and the hatch creaked open. A gust of stale air rose up, smelling faintly of oil and something older. Metal, money, maybe both. Shadow sniffed, then let out a low growl that vibrated in his chest. Michael aimed his flashlight into the darkness. The beam revealed a narrow ladder descending into a small chamber, maybe 8 feet deep. He hesitated, instinct warring with curiosity. Then he muttered, "Stay here," and climbed down. The bottom was frozen dirt mixed with concrete. The flashlight beam danced over rows of metal crates stacked along the wall, each one stenciled with faded markings. RMR Logistics Co. A name he didn't recognize. He brushed the frost off one of the lids and pried it open. Inside, wrapped in canvas, lay a dozen assault rifles, clean, oiled, and ready for use. Beneath them, sealed packets of ammunition gleamed under the light. Another crate, half open, was filled with bundles of cash, US dollars and foreign bills, packed tight and bound with rubber bands. Michael's stomach tightened. Jesus. He crouched, studying the crates. The markings weren't standard military, but the organization was precise, professional. Whoever ran this operation knew logistics, supply chains, and how to hide in plain sight. This wasn't random crime. This was infrastructure. He pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over Grace's number. But before he could call, a muffled noise drifted from above, a branch snapping under weight. Michael froze, then clicked off his flashlight. The darkness pressed in close. Shadow's faint growl echoed through the hatch opening. "Easy," Michael whispered. He climbed the ladder slowly, careful not to make sound. When his head reached ground level, he scanned the clearing. The wind had died. Even the pines seemed to be holding their breath. Then, movement, a flicker between the trees. Someone was there. Michael's hand found the rifle. He crouched low, eyes locked on the tree line. A figure slipped between the shadows, too far to identify but close enough that he could hear the crunch of boots. Whoever it was, they were watching the hatch, maybe waiting for him to leave. He exhaled quietly. Not today. A rustle, then silence again. After a minute, the figure melted into the trees. Michael waited another 5 before standing. Whoever they were, they moved like professionals, no wasted motion, no sound out of place. He shut the hatch, burying it under snow until it looked untouched, then slung the rifle over his shoulder and headed back toward the cabin. Shadow stayed close, muscles taut, ears rotating constantly. The walk back felt longer, the air heavier. Halfway down the ridge, Michael finally spoke. "That's what they were guarding, huh? A goddamn weapons stash." Shadow gave a soft chuff, as if agreeing. When they reached the cabin, Michael wasted no time. He brushed the snow from his boots, shut the door, and locked it. Then he picked up the phone again and called Grace. She answered on the third ring. "Grayson, everything all right?" "Depends on how you define that." He took a breath. "I found something. You'd better see it for yourself." "Found what?" "Guns, a lot of them, hidden under the old wreck near the ridge. Whoever chained Shadow there wasn't just being cruel. They were guarding something." Grace's voice tightened. "You sure?" "I don't make guesses like this," he said flatly. "And someone's been watching the place. You might want to come armed." There was a pause. Then, "Give me 20 minutes." He hung up and paced the floor. Shadow followed his every move, tail flicking low. Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering against the windows like a warning. 25 minutes later, tires crunched in the driveway. Grace's cruiser pulled up, its headlights sweeping across the snow. She stepped out, bundled in her winter jacket, her auburn hair tucked into a beanie, her cheeks pink from the cold. She carried her service pistol on her hip and a flashlight in her hand. "You weren't kidding about the cold," she said, voice muffled through her scarf. Michael gestured toward the woods. "You might want to see what's under that truck." Grace arched an eyebrow. "You're serious, aren't you?" "I wish I wasn't." They trudged through the snow together, Shadow trotting between them. The daylight was already dimming into that blue twilight Montana was famous for. When they reached the ridge, Michael showed her the hatch. Grace knelt, brushed away the snow, and shone her light down. Her breath caught. "Holy hell," she whispered. "That's a small armory." "More like a supply point," Michael said. "Someone's moving product through Rivermount." Grace stood, her eyes narrowing. "Then we've got a problem. This isn't just local crime. This looks federal." Michael nodded grimly. "That's what I thought." Before either could say more, Shadow's growl rolled through the clearing again, low, deep, and certain. Grace turned, scanning the woods. "You hear that?" Michael raised his rifle. "Yeah." In the fading light, a shape darted between the trees, fast, deliberate, human. Then another. 2 figures, maybe 3. Grace drew her pistol, breath clouding in the cold. "We need to move." They backed toward the trail, keeping their lights off. The forest felt alive around them, branches creaking, snow shifting under unseen weight. A single gunshot cracked the air, distant but close enough to echo. "Go," Michael barked. They ran until the cabin came into view, shadows streaking across the snow behind them. When they burst through the door, Michael slammed it shut, locking it tight. Grace leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "Whoever's out there," she said, "they know we found it." Michael nodded, staring out the window where the tree line disappeared into night. "Then they'll be back." Shadow stood by the door, head low, eyes burning with alertness. In the reflection of the glass, Michael saw his own face, hard, steady, and ready for a fight he hadn't asked for. Outside, the woods of Rivermount went quiet again, the kind of quiet that always comes before the next storm. The wind picked up again that evening, howling through the pines like a warning that no one wanted to hear. The sun had long vanished behind the ridges, and Rivermount's woods had fallen into that uneasy quiet that always came before trouble. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low, casting amber light across the rough walls. Michael Grayson sat at the table, the rifle cleaned and propped beside him, a half-finished mug of coffee growing cold at his elbow. Shadow lay near the door, head resting on his paws but eyes half open, muscles coiled even in rest. Neither of them slept well anymore. Grace had left an hour earlier after locking up the evidence photographs and promising to report the hidden cache to the state task force. She had looked tired but determined, her auburn hair tucked into her jacket, and her expression hardened by the weight of secrets she wasn't ready to explain. "You need to keep that dog close," she'd said before leaving. "If they were guarding the stash, they'll come for what's left of it, or for him." Now, as the cabin groaned under the weight of the storm, Michael stared into the fire, replaying her words. The silence around the place felt wrong, the kind that buzzed in the back of your skull. Shadow lifted his head suddenly, ears twitching, his gaze locked on the window, a low growl built in his throat. Michael rose from his chair, every instinct snapping awake. He crossed the room quietly, glancing through the window pane. The yard was a sheet of pale snow under the moonlight, still untouched. Then, movement, a flicker near the tree line, quick and deliberate. "Easy, boy," he whispered, moving back to the table for his rifle. Shadow stood now, body rigid, the fur along his spine rising like static. The dog's growl deepened into something primal, the sound of a guardian ready to die fighting. The first sound came from the back door, the faintest scrape of metal against the latch. Michael's pulse quickened. There was another at the front, the creak of weight on the porch boards. More than one. He positioned himself behind the kitchen counter, rifle angled low. "All right," he murmured. "Let's see what you want." The door handle turned once, then again, a pause. And then the back door exploded inward with a crash, wood splintering across the floor. 3 men in dark coats and ski masks rushed inside, snow swirling around them. The first carried a hunting knife, blade long and curved. The second held a crowbar, and the third, broad-shouldered, with a limp in his left leg, gripped a handgun clumsily, like someone who'd used it more in threat than skill. Michael didn't hesitate. The rifle came up and barked once, the shot deafening in the small cabin. The man with the crowbar dove aside, screaming as a bullet tore through his shoulder. Shadow lunged forward at the same moment, a blur of motion and fury. The shepherd hit the man with the knife mid-charge, jaws, clamping around the attacker's wrist. The knife clattered to the floor as Shadow dragged him down, snarling. The man with the handgun cursed and fired wildly. The shot shattered a lamp, spraying glass across the wall. Michael dropped behind the counter, then swung the rifle up again. One clean shot. The pistol flew from the man's hand, disappearing into the darkness. "You picked the wrong house," Michael growled, voice flat and cold. The man with the limp scrambled back toward the door, dragging his wounded partner. The third man, Shadow's prey, kicked free just long enough to stumble to his feet. He backed toward the window, clutching his bleeding arm. His mask had torn loose, revealing a face lined with stubble, maybe mid-40s, eyes mean and hollow. "You don't know what that dog is," he hissed. Michael leveled the rifle. "I know he's mine." The man's lips twisted into a bitter grin. "He doesn't belong to you. He never did. They'll come for him. You can't stop that." Michael's jaw clenched. "Try me." The man bolted toward the back door. Michael fired. The bullet struck the frame beside his head, showering him with splinters. He disappeared into the storm, his shouts fading into the wind. The others followed, stumbling through the snow until the forest swallowed them whole. Silence fell again, heavy and absolute. Only the fire crackled, and the soft panting of Shadow filled the space between heartbeats. Michael lowered the rifle slowly, the adrenaline beginning to ebb. "Good boy," he said quietly. Shadow limped back toward him, muzzle streaked with blood, eyes bright with feral focus. His chest heaved, but he was alive, unbroken. Michael knelt, checking him quickly. The dog's front leg bore a shallow cut from the knife, nothing fatal. Still, it made Michael's stomach tighten. "You're a damn soldier," he murmured. Shadow pressed his head against Michael's shoulder, tail thumping once before he sank to the floor, exhausted. Michael rechecked the doors, reinforcing them with a wooden bar and moving a chair under the handle. He turned off the lights and stood at the window, peering into the dark. Snow drifted past in lazy spirals, erasing the intruder's footprints faster than he could trace them. He picked up one of the dropped masks, turning it in his hand. The fabric smelled faintly of oil and something metallic, gun lubricant. Whoever these men were, they weren't amateurs. His phone buzzed on the counter. "Grace." He answered. "Yeah? You okay?" she asked, her voice low, urgent. "3 of them. Broke in just now. Tried to grab Shadow." "Jesus, are you hurt?" "No, they are. I'll get a team out there." "No." Michael's tone stopped her cold. "If they're connected to the cache, you can't trust everyone on your team. Someone knew exactly where to find me." There was a long pause. "You think we've got a leak?" "I think you should act like you do." She exhaled slowly. "All right. Sit tight. I'll come myself." Michael hung up and rubbed a hand over his face. His pulse was still pounding in his ears, but the rush had begun to fade, leaving behind only clarity, cold, sharp, unyielding. These men hadn't come for money or revenge. They'd come for Shadow. He looked down at the dog, now dozing lightly by the stove, his breathing slow but steady. The firelight painted golden lines across the shepherd's coat. Michael knelt beside him, whispering, "You've been part of something big, haven't you? And they want you erased." Shadow stirred, one ear twitching at the sound of his voice. There was something in his expression that almost looked like understanding. Outside, another gust of wind rattled the porch. Michael rose, checked the locks again, then moved to the small cabinet beside the door where he kept his father's old revolver. He loaded it methodically, the sound of metal clicking into place strangely comforting. "Let them come," he muttered. By the time Grace's headlights appeared at the end of the drive, the snow had started to fall again, heavy, relentless, erasing the world in white. Michael opened the door as she stepped out, bundled tight, pistol drawn. Her eyes widened when she saw the damage. "God, Michael," she whispered. "They were here," he said simply. She crouched beside Shadow, her breath fogging in the cold. "He's bleeding." "Superficial," Michael said. "He saved my life." Grace looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Then you're both lucky, because whoever sent them won't stop." Michael met her gaze, the firelight catching the hard set of his jaw. "Let them try. This dog's not dying a second time." Outside, the snow swallowed the last trace of footprints. The woods stood still again, but this time, the silence felt like a promise of war. By dawn, Rivermount was blanketed under a pale light that made every surface glisten like glass. The snow from the night before had hardened, forming a crust that crunched underfoot. Michael Grayson stood beside his truck, checking his rifle with practiced precision. Shadow sat close, breath steaming in the icy air, eyes sharp as amber glass. The dog's wound from the night before had already begun to heal, just a shallow cut now hidden beneath his thick coat. But something in his posture was different, more alert, more aware, as if he knew the fight wasn't over. Grace arrived in her patrol SUV a few minutes later. She stepped out, bundled in her navy parka, auburn hair tucked beneath a wool cap. Her face looked tired, eyes rimmed red from sleepless hours. Yet the determination in them was unwavering. "I talked to the sheriff," she said, closing the door behind her. "He wants us to wait for backup." Michael gave a low, humorless laugh. "Backup? The same people who leaked our location?" Grace hesitated but didn't argue. "He doesn't know about last night yet. I didn't tell him everything." "Good," Michael said, sliding a shell into the chamber. "Then we still have a chance." Grace's gaze shifted to Shadow, whose ears flicked at her voice. "He ready?" Michael glanced down. He was born ready. Before Grace could reply, the sound of boots crunching on snow interrupted them. They turned to see Tommy Reynolds, the 12-year-old boy from next door, jogging toward them, clutching his sketchbook tight against his chest. His breath came out in white bursts, his coat zipped to the chin. "Tommy, what the hell are you doing here?" Michael asked. The boy skidded to a stop, panting. I heard something. Down by the river docks last night. Mr. Kane was there. I swear I saw him." Grace's brows shot up. "Robert Kane? The businessman?" Tommy nodded rapidly. "He was talking to 2 men near the barges. Said something about a shipment going out tonight before midnight. He said, 'No cops, no dogs, and no more mistakes.'" Michael exchanged a look with Grace. "That explains last night." Grace turned back to the boy, crouching to meet his eye level. "Tommy, what you heard is dangerous, all right? You need to go straight home and stay there. Don't tell anyone, not even your mom." Tommy's face paled, but he nodded. "Are you going to stop him?" Grace stood, her voice steady. "That's the plan." When the boy disappeared down the hill, Grace exhaled, fog drifting from her lips. "So the golden boy of Rivermount isn't just laundering cash through his shipping company, he's running weapons." Michael nodded grimly. "And now he's desperate to cover his tracks." By nightfall, the sky over the Rivermount River had turned the color of gunmetal. The current moved slow beneath a thin crust of ice, carrying shards of reflected light from the distant flood lamps along the dock. The air smelled faintly of oil, diesel, and snow. Michael crouched behind a stack of wooden crates, rifle across his knees. Beside him, Shadow lay perfectly still, only the faint rise and fall of his chest betraying life. Grace was positioned a few yards away behind an abandoned forklift, pistol drawn, radio silent. From across the river came the low hum of an approaching engine, a truck pulling into the dockyard. Its headlights swept across the snow, revealing the silhouettes of 5 men unloading heavy crates from the back. At their center stood Robert Kane. Kane was in his late 40s, tall and lean, wearing a tailored overcoat despite the cold. His black hair was slicked neatly back, and his features were sharp, angular, the kind of face built for cameras and campaign posters. But his eyes told another story. Dark, calculating, and void of warmth. Once, he'd been Rivermount's biggest philanthropist, the man who donated to schools, funded road repairs, and shook hands with mayors. Now, in the harsh glow of the truck lights, he looked like what he truly was, a predator in a polished suit. "Move it," Kane barked, his voice slicing through the wind. "The barge leaves in 10 minutes. We don't have time for mistakes," Michael whispered into his radio. "Grace, you see him?" "Yeah," she whispered back. "The bastard's right where we need him. Wait for my signal." They watched as the men stacked the last of the crates by the dock's edge. One of them pried open a lid, revealing the glint of polished steel, assault rifles wrapped in oiled cloth. Kane knelt, inspecting the contents before nodding. "Load them all. No delays." Grace's finger tightened on the trigger. "Say the word." "Now," Michael said. They moved as one. Grace rose from cover, pistol raised. "Police, drop your weapons." Michael stepped out beside her, rifle leveled. Shadow barked once, a sharp command that echoed through the cold air. For a heartbeat, the dock froze. Then chaos erupted. One of Kane's men fired first. The bullet shattered a floodlight, plunging part of the dock into Shadow. Michael returned fire, hitting the gunman square in the shoulder. Grace moved in tight formation, her steps steady, shots precise. Another man tried to flank her, but Shadow lunged from the dark, teeth sinking into his arm. The man screamed, spinning as the dog dragged him down into the snow. Kane ducked behind a crate, shouting orders. "Get the shipment out now!" Michael advanced, bullets sparking against metal around him. The cold air filled with the thunder of gunfire and the hiss of ricochets. He saw Kane break cover, sprinting toward the barge, a pistol flashing in his hand. "Kane!" Michael roared. "It's over!" Kane fired back, the shot whistling past Michael's ear. Then another, closer this time. Michael dropped behind a crate, breath heaving, snow dusting his hair and coat. Grace moved along the flank, her movements quick and sure. "Cover me!" she shouted. Michael popped up, firing 2 rounds in rapid succession. Kane stumbled, slipping on the ice, the pistol skittering away. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. The sound, the wind, even the river itself. Then came a single gunshot from one of Kane's men behind a truck. Michael turned just in time to see the flash of muzzle. He didn't have time to move. But Shadow did. The shepherd lunged from behind, knocking Michael aside just as the bullet tore through the space where his chest had been. The sound was deafening. Michael hit the ground hard, rolling onto his back. Shadow yelped but stayed on his feet, teeth bared, charging the shooter. "Shadow!" Michael shouted, scrambling up. He grabbed his rifle, aimed, and fired. The gunman fell, his weapon clattering into the snow. Shadow staggered back toward Michael, blood staining his side. Michael caught him, cradling the dog's head. "Stay with me, buddy. You're all right." The sirens came then. Grace's call for backup finally answered. Red and blue lights flashed across the white snow as patrol cars surrounded the dock. The remaining smugglers dropped their weapons, hands raised. Kane, still kneeling by the barge, was dragged to his feet by 2 officers. His face was pale, fury smoldering behind his calm facade. Grace strode up, her pistol still raised. "Robert Kane, you're under arrest for arms trafficking, assault, and conspiracy. Anything you say can and will be used against you." Kane smirked, blood on his lip. "You think this changes anything? You can't kill what you can't see." Michael stepped forward, rifle slung but ready. "Maybe not, but we can damn sure drag it into the light." As the officers hauled Kane toward the cars, Michael knelt beside Shadow again. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady. Grace crouched beside him, resting a hand on Michael's shoulder. "He saved you." Michael nodded, voice rough. "He's done that twice now." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of oil and blood across the frozen river. Behind them, the crates of weapons sat stacked in the snow, proof of everything Kane had tried to hide. For the first time in weeks, Michael felt something close to peace. The war wasn't over, but they had won this battle. He looked down at Shadow, whose eyes blinked open just enough to meet his. "We're going home," he whispered. "You hear me? We're going home." Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and clean, covering the blood, the guns, and the sins of Rivermount beneath a blanket of white. The snow had finally begun to melt in Rivermount. After weeks of storms and sirens, the town felt alive again. The morning sun hung low above the mountains, painting the rooftops gold and the river silver. It was a rare kind of peace, the kind that comes only after everything that could have gone wrong already had. Michael Grayson stood near the steps of the Rivermount Town Hall, adjusting the collar of his clean flannel shirt. The cold air bit at his face, but he didn't mind. For once, the crowd gathering before him wasn't hostile or curious. It was warm, familiar. People waved as they passed, calling his name, some patting him on the shoulder. It had been years since anyone in town had looked at him that way. Not like the quiet veteran who kept to himself, but like a man who had come home. Beside him, Shadow sat proudly, a faint scar visible along his side where the bullet had grazed him. His coat gleamed in the morning light, thick and well-groomed, his amber eyes calm but alert. The townsfolk had turned him into something of a legend. The hero K9, they called him. Yet to Michael, he was just the same dog who had once been left for dead by a rusted truck, still watching the world with the patience of an old soldier. Grace stood nearby, her uniform crisp under the sunlight. She looked different now, not just from the new badge polished to perfection on her chest, but from the way she carried herself. The exhaustion that had haunted her eyes for weeks had softened, replaced with quiet pride. "You ready for this?" she asked, glancing at Michael with a smirk. "Ready as I'll ever be," he said. "Didn't think I'd be standing up here again, not after the last time." Grace smiled faintly. "That's the thing about second chances. They sneak up on you when you're too stubborn to expect them." The mayor, Harold Dempsey, stepped up to the podium. He was a stocky man in his 60s with a balding head, thick gray mustache, and a deep voice made for speeches. A lifelong resident of Rivermount, Harold had seen the town's glory days and its decline, and today's ceremony meant more to him than he'd admit. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing across the square, "today we honor not just bravery, but redemption. A few weeks ago, this town was on the brink of becoming a battleground for greed and corruption. Because of the courage of one man and one remarkable dog, we stand here free from that shadow." The crowd applauded, the sound rolling through the square like thunder. Shadow's ears perked, tail flicking once. Harold continued, "Michael Grayson, your actions went beyond duty. You protected our home, our people, and brought to light a truth that many tried to bury. And Shadow, well, I've seen a lot of heroes in my life, but never one that walks on 4 legs and still teaches us what loyalty really means." He gestured for them to step forward. Michael hesitated, then walked up with Shadow at his side. The mayor reached into a small velvet box and pulled out a silver medal engraved with the town seal and the words, "For valor and service, to Rivermount." He pinned it to Michael's chest, then knelt slightly and fastened a smaller medal to Shadow's collar. The applause came again, louder this time. Children cheered, someone whistled, a few veterans saluted. Grace clapped quietly, a proud smile tugging at her lips. Michael glanced down at Shadow. "Guess you're officially the better soldier now," he murmured. The dog tilted his head, as if half understanding, half mocking his human's humility. After the ceremony, the crowd lingered. People took photos, shook Michael's hand, and bent down to pet Shadow. Tommy Reynolds came running through the snow, cheeks flushed and a rolled-up paper tucked under his arm. "Mr. Grayson, I made something for you," he said breathlessly. Michael crouched as the boy handed him the paper. When he unrolled it, his breath caught. It was a hand-drawn painting, rough around the edges but full of heart. It showed a man and his German shepherd standing against the backdrop of snowy pines, a faint sunrise breaking behind them. At the bottom, written in careful block letters, were the words, "The man and his dog." Michael smiled, his voice thick. "That's beautiful, Tommy." The boy grinned shyly. "Mom says you remind her of my dad. Tough but kind. I hope when I grow up, I'm like you." Michael placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Kid, if you've got half your mom's courage and your dad's heart, you'll be better than me." Grace watched the exchange quietly, her eyes soft. "You're good with people when you forget to be hard on yourself," she said, as Tommy ran back toward his mother. "Guess the dog's been teaching me," Michael replied with a small smile. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, the square slowly emptied, leaving only the distant echo of laughter and the sound of boots crunching snow. Grace gave a final wave before heading to her cruiser. "Don't disappear again, all right?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "You mean like before?" She smirked. Exactly like before. Then she drove off, leaving twin tracks in the snow. Michael and Shadow walked the road back home, the wind soft against their faces. The world felt lighter now. Not perfect, not fixed, but alive again. When they reached the cabin, the porch light flickered warm and golden, a welcome beacon after all the chaos. Michael poured himself a cup of coffee and stepped outside. The night sky spread wide above him, stars bright enough to paint the snow in silver. Shadow sat beside him, gazing into the distance, his body still and steady. Michael set his mug down, crouching beside the dog. His voice was low, rough around the edges, but calm. "We both fought our wars," he said softly, resting a hand on Shadow's neck. "And somehow we made it home." Shadow exhaled, leaning into his touch. The wind carried a faint howl through the trees, not of danger, but of life returning. For the first time in a long time, Michael let himself smile, not the cautious kind, but the quiet, genuine one that comes when pain finally loosens its grip. The porch light flickered once more, steadying against the dark. Above them the stars shimmered, because not every miracle blazes like fire or thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the shape of a man and his dog, sitting side by side in the snow, finally at peace. Sometimes miracles don't come wrapped in light or thunder. They don't always arrive with angels or choirs. Sometimes they come quietly, on 4 legs, wearing scars instead of wings. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that faith doesn't always roar. It often whispers through loyalty, courage, and love. Maybe that's how God works in our lives too, not through grand gestures, but through the people and creatures he sends when we need them most. The stranger who helps when no one else will. The friend who listens when the world goes silent. The loyal soul who stands beside us when every door seems closed. If you've ever felt lost, if life's storms have left you cold and tired, remember this story. Remember that faith can take many forms. Sometimes it looks like a soldier finding peace. Sometimes it looks like a dog who refused to give up. And sometimes it looks like you, still standing after everything. So tonight, wherever you are, take a moment. Thank God for the quiet miracles in your life, for the loyalty, for the love, for the second chances you didn't think you deserved. May God bless you, your family, and every loyal heart still fighting its battles. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family here at Paws Kingdom. Because sometimes, the smallest stories remind us of the greatest truth. Faith still walks among us,